Hold your positions, the Grendel is coming through. Commander Tobias Kor's voice cut through the sterile comms link like a knife. His hand gripped the console, knuckles white, as the ship's colossal shape emerged from the dark folds of space, an angular silhouette against the void. His pulse didn't quicken. It never did, but his eyes, always sharp, missed nothing as the swirling lights of the fleet's laser plasma displays reflected off the matte surface of the ship. The aliens had already started. Snickers rippled through the comms from their side, a symphony of derision. Tobias could hear the quiet mockery of their voices even before they spoke. They didn't know what they were in for. He clenched his jaw. Captain Kor, I have the display, his tactical officer Darian Vex said from across the bridge, pointing at the laser plasma display. A massive image of the Grendel appeared, its boxy design stark against the sleek, curved ships of the alien fleet. The ship's dull gray exterior contrasted sharply with the gleaming and elegant ships of the Galactic Council. Can't believe they sent this, Gor Rock, one of the alien commanders said, his voice dripping with mockery. Is this their idea of a warship? The image of the Grendel flickered, displaying its angular, blocky frame. The ship's edges were sharp, defined, like a jagged stone in the midst of polished jewels. A hushed laughter swept through the council's ranks as their eyes scanned the oversized display. This box should be no more than a cargo carrier. It certainly doesn't belong in the ranks of our fleets. Virlan, another leader from the alien coalition, chimed in. His tone was laced with disbelief. His mental prowess clearly underestimated the simplicity of Earth's design. We need shields that withstand supernovas and engines that slice through the folds of space. Not this. His words punctuated the quiet, sending more laughter echoing through the chamber. Tobias kept his composure. He had expected this. He'd been prepared for this from the very moment Earth had decided to step into this alliance. The galaxy thought humanity unworthy, primitive, insignificant. They had no idea. He straightened in his chair, taking in the alien council's reactions. His heart beat with the rhythm of the Grendel's massive engines, but it was the calm certainty that gripped him now, not anger. He could almost feel the skepticism in the room, a living thing crawling through the air like a sickness. Commander Kor, came a voice, breaking the tension. It was the voice of a council speaker, an alien figure made of shifting light and energy. We understand that Earth's technological prowess has been underappreciated, but surely even you see that this, they gestured at the Grendel's image, is not the answer to our needs. Tobias's eyes never left the screen. His mind was already calculating. You're right, he said, his voice sharp but level. It's not what you expected, but it's exactly what you need. The room fell silent. Even Gor Rock, the most vocal critic, hesitated before speaking. Tobias had caught his attention, but only just. He turned to face his crew, who were all now waiting for his command. His eyes scanned their faces, seeing the grit and determination. They believed in him. They trusted him. They were ready for this. Activate the phase shift systems. Let's show them what we can do, Tobias ordered. The ship responded almost instantly. Beneath the bridge, deep in the belly of the Grendel, the quantum displacement engines hummed into action, not in a steady mechanical pulse, but in chaotic bursts, as if the very structure of space was being bent and contorted around the ship. As the lights flickered and the ship's hull began to vibrate, Tobias's eyes never wavered from the display. The aliens hadn't seen anything yet, and they wouldn't until it was too late. Engage phase shift, he commanded, his voice firm, unwavering. The laughter died. Gorak's voice once again filled the comms. What's happening? The confusion was palpable, even through the transmission. The Grendel vanished from the laser plasma display, flickering out of existence for a split second, only to reappear 100 meters to the left, its jagged frame flickering like a ghost in the starlit dark. A ripple of disorientation swept through the council fleet. Tobias knew the aliens hadn't seen anything like it, nothing that could explain what they were witnessing. Their ships, capable of shifting between light years with ease, couldn't comprehend what was happening. This was not mere technology at play. This was a natural force in action. What the hell? Virlan cut himself off. Tobias could feel their unease through the comms, and a spark of satisfaction ignited deep in his chest. "This is Earth's contribution," Tobias said, his voice soft, but carrying the weight of 1,000 years of evolution. "We may not have the flashy shields, but we have something else." His eyes turned to the viewfinder ahead. The Grendel's quantum displacement field wasn't some simple trick. It was something that couldn't be adapted to, something that couldn't be predicted. The fleet had no time to react. The sudden wave of panic came like a storm. Virlan and Gorak scrambled to reorganize their fleets, their ships jerking away from the sudden change in the Grendel's position. The ship moved again, phasing out, then reappearing in another direction. The alien fleet's energy weapons aimed at empty space. They fired, but their beams passed through the void, missing the Grendel completely. Tobias could feel the ship shifting beneath him, as if it were alive, dancing in sync with the chaos unfolding around it. The Grendel wasn't just avoiding fire, it was warping the very fabric of space, like a creature of old, a primal thing that refused to be understood or tamed. The comms crackled again, this time with a newfound edge of urgency. "It's gone. How do you stop that?" Gorak's voice trembled slightly, and for the first time since arriving, Tobias could hear the fear in his words. Virlan's response was cold, almost calculating. "We need to adapt, quickly. The Grendel's position is unstable. If we can just—" "Then you'll fail," Tobias interrupted, a calm certainty in his tone. "Because you can't adapt to something that doesn't play by the rules." He watched as alien ships scattered, unsure of how to attack or counter. But Tobias didn't need them to understand. They would, in time. They just wouldn't know it yet. "We don't need to explain," he muttered under his breath, more to himself than anyone else. "Not yet." The battle was just beginning, and Tobias Kor, with the might of the Grendel, was about to show them all that the simplest designs, when backed by Earth's ingenuity, could reshape the future. But the war had only begun. The Grendel moved again, silently, through the void. The galaxy had no idea what it was in for. The Grendel phased once again, slipping through space like a shadow that refused to stay in one place. Tobias Kor could feel the faint tremor of the ship's hull as it moved, not in the way that a ship with traditional engines would have shuddered. There was no growl of thrust, no roar of propulsion, just an unsettling silence, as if the ship itself was becoming part of the void. It was unlike anything the galaxy's advanced civilizations had ever experienced. And that was the problem. They had no way to counter it. "Captain, they're moving in." Darien Vek's voice broke the silence. His words were calm but laden with urgency, a quiet storm beneath the surface. Tobias turned his eyes to the laser plasma display where the enemy fleet loomed. Dozens of ships, sleek and shimmering, twisting through the cold expanse. It was beautiful in its own way, the way light played off their smooth curves like some alien form of art, but Tobias knew they were no artists. "Activate secondary shift," Tobias commanded. "Let them chase shadows." The ship jerked, and for a moment the faint whine of strained circuits sliced through the air. Then silence returned. The Grendel disappeared again, this time just beyond the enemy fleet's reach. The alien ships, with their advanced targeting systems and staggering speed, fired into the empty black. Their beams screamed past the Grendel as it flickered back into view, a solid mass once more. A ripple of surprise moved through the Council fleet, and Tobias could feel the slightest tension in the bridge crew. They hadn't expected Earth's technology to be alive like this. Fluid. Impossible. Tobias's fingers pressed harder against the edge of his seat as his eyes swept over the crew. They were ready. He was ready. But the question remained, would this bluff work? "Target locked," came the voice of the weapons officer Merrick Solis from the back of the bridge. Tobias nodded once, just enough to acknowledge, but there was no time for celebration. The first wave of enemy ships was already closing in, their formations too clean, too practiced. They were quick, faster than anything Earth had, but not faster than what Tobias had planned. The problem was, they didn't need speed. They needed an edge, and Tobias had just handed them one. "Deploy the disruptor pulses," Tobias ordered, and without a word, the crew got to work. The ship lurched beneath him, and the Grendel phased out of space-time once more. For a brief moment, the entire world outside the ship appeared to fade into stillness. Then, like a knife through soft cloth, the enemy ships began to flicker, then freeze in place. The disruption wasn't just physical. It was a disturbance in their reality. Tobias knew it wouldn't last long. The swarm, adaptive as they were, would soon figure out how to react. "We've got 30 seconds, Darian's voice came again, but this time it carried a weight that Tobias could feel tightening in his chest. "Lock onto the core of the closest ship," Tobias ordered, voice quiet but unyielding. "Give them a surprise they won't forget." On the view screen, the alien ships, those sleek, glistening models of technological perfection, now seemed sluggish, disoriented. They were trying to adapt, to predict, but their strategies were floundering. The Grendel wasn't like anything they had fought before. Tobias saw one ship, its engines sputtering, trying to realign, but there was no clear answer to this puzzle. And that, Tobias realized, was the key. The swarm couldn't adapt to unpredictability. The ship jerked again, another phase shift, but this time the Grendel dropped back into real space with a violence that rattled the crew's bones. It was no longer just a stealth ship. It was now a hammer, poised to strike. The crew didn't flinch, though. They had trained for this. Marek's voice crackled over the comms, sharp and full of intent. "Pulse ready, Captain." "Fire," Tobias said, his voice dropping to a near whisper, more a command to the air than anything else. The pulse hit like a tidal wave, rippling outward from the Grendel's core. The lead swarm ship was the first to suffer. Tobias saw its shields, once shimmering like a glass wall, flicker, disintegrating under the shockwave, and then it was gone. The ship evaporated in a burst of light, but no explosion. It was as if the ship had simply decided to cease existing. The Council fleet fell silent. Tobias could hear his own breath, ragged in the sudden quiet. "That's impossible." Gorak's voice was thick with disbelief, the harshness of his tone softened by awe. "It's called warping," Tobias replied, his voice calm, though the tension in his chest hadn't loosened. "Your ships are designed to predict. Ours aren't." Another ship fell. The alien fleet began to scramble, regrouping into chaotic, clumsy formations as the first of their ships vanished into nothingness. Tobias knew they couldn't afford to let them escape. The Grendel's technology was meant to disorient, to shake their reality, but they had to keep the pressure on. "They're retreating," Virlan's voice floated through the bridge comms, reluctant but resigned. "I didn't think Earth had anything like this." The fleet had underestimated them, and now they were paying the price. Tobias could see the slightest edge of a smile tugging at the corners of Marek's mouth, but he quickly wiped it away, refocusing on the task at hand. "They're adapting," Darian said with a slight edge of urgency. His eyes never left the heads-up display that showed the alien fleet's repositioning. "They're learning faster than we anticipated." Tobias nodded. "We keep moving." He ordered the Grendel to shift again, flitting just beyond the alien fleet's reach. Their ships were powerful, yes, but they were predictable. Each time they adjusted, each time they reorganized, the Grendel would be waiting, hidden, waiting to strike again. But Tobias knew it wouldn't be enough to just keep hiding. Not when the enemy was adapting so quickly. They would have to take the next step. He turned to Darian, his voice low, but steady. "Prepare the secondary disruptor. We're going to hit them where they least expect it." As the Grendel phased out of space once more, Tobias' core felt a growing certainty in his bones. This fight wasn't about weapons, or tactics, or even technology. This fight was about time. Time to shift, to change, to strike before the enemy knew what hit them. And for the first time since Earth had joined the Council, Tobias was certain they had a chance. The galaxy didn't know it yet, but it was about to learn a very harsh lesson. The Grendel phased once more, flickering into existence like a shadow in the darkness, disappearing before the alien fleet had time to react. Tobias could feel the hum of energy beneath his feet, the subtle tremor of the ship as it slipped through the folds of space. The tension was thick on the bridge, Every officer's eyes locked to their respective displays, anticipating the next move. "Shifting again," Darien Vex said quietly, his gaze flicking to the heads-up display. He didn't look panicked, not in the way most would have, but Tobias knew the weight of the situation pressed on him just the same. "They're closing in faster this time." "Stay ahead of them," Tobias replied, his voice steady. He'd seen this pattern before. The swarm adapted quickly, but not enough. Not yet. The ship shuddered slightly as it transitioned again, the space around them warping into strange, unfamiliar shapes. But Tobias never lost his focus. It was the key to everything. The alien ships had begun to fire in erratic patterns, attempting to anticipate the Grendel's next move. But that was the mistake they made. They were used to controlling the battlefield with sheer firepower, calculating every possible response. They had assumed Earth would play by the same rules. Tobias's fingers hovered over the console, eyes scanning the rapidly shifting data. The Council fleet had recovered their bearings, regrouping after the Grendel's earlier strike. The Grendel was a ghost to them, its form fluctuating in and out of existence, and Tobias was using that to his advantage. "Virlan's fleet is restructuring," Marek Solis said, his voice low but sharp. "They're going for a full encirclement." Tobias nodded, eyes narrowing. He had anticipated this move, but the question was whether their technology was ready to handle what was coming. The ships had adapted their weapon systems to counter Earth's unpredictable maneuvers, but what they didn't know was that the Grendel's most effective weapon wasn't its offensive capabilities. It was its ability to shift the balance of the battlefield in the blink of an eye. "Prepare the disruptor pulse," Tobias ordered. "We need to break their formation." A soft click echoed through the bridge as Marek began inputting the commands. Tobias wasn't sure if they were prepared for what was about to happen, but he didn't have time to wait. The Grendel was already moving again, sliding through space, its shape appearing and vanishing like a mirage. The alien ships began to fire, but they were too late. The disruption pulse hit before they could fully engage, sweeping through the formation like a wave crashing on a shore. Tobias saw the alien fleet stagger, ships jerking out of sync, unable to adjust to the sudden distortion. The pulse didn't destroy them. It didn't need to. It simply unraveled their cohesion, their rhythm. Tobias could almost feel the shockwave ripple through space as the alien fleet struggled to maintain its strength. "They're trying to reorganize," Darien muttered, eyes glued to his console. "But it's not working." Tobias watched as the swarm ships scattered, unable to follow their previous plans. They had anticipated Earth's ship to be a sitting target, clumsy, predictable. But the Grendel had no such weaknesses. Earth's technology wasn't flashy. It wasn't designed to dazzle with overwhelming firepower. But it was crafted with a different approach, one that emphasized adaptability over force. A ripple of confidence passed through the crew. Tobias could feel it, even through the tension that gripped the air. But there was no time to savor the moment. The enemy was regaining composure faster than he expected. "Prepare the second phase," Tobias said, his voice cutting through the murmur of his crew. "We're going to push them farther than they expect." They were close now, so close that Tobias could practically taste the approaching victory, but something gnawed at him, a strange unease he couldn't shake. The swarm had already begun adapting, their ships breaking off into smaller, faster groups. Tobias's mind raced as he tracked their movements. They were learning faster than he'd anticipated, but that wasn't a problem. It was an opportunity. "Shift the ship's phase in 3-second intervals," Tobias ordered, his hand hovering over the command. "We need to stay one step ahead." The crew responded instantly. The Grendel flickered in and out of reality like a fleeting nightmare, too fast for the swarm to predict. Tobias watched their formation collapse in real time, the ships scrambling to catch up, but always falling just short. The swarm's weapons fired into empty space, missing their target completely. "They've lost track of us," Marek said, his eyes wide. "They don't know where we are anymore." Tobias knew that this was the moment. The enemy was disoriented, confused, but their arrogance still ran deep. They didn't fully understand the nature of their opponent. They didn't understand that Earth's greatest strength lay not in brute force, but in the ability to think differently. "Take us into their core," Tobias ordered. "We'll hit them where it hurts." The ship's engines flared to life, not with the violent surge of power typical of space battles, but with an eerie calm as the Grendel slid silently into the heart of the alien fleet. The crew was ready. Tobias could feel their resolve strengthening with each passing second, but even as the plan unfolded, his mind remained sharp, calculating, aware that the battle wasn't over. Not yet. As the Grendel made its way into the center of the alien fleet, Tobias felt the ship's form shift again, the disruption pulse charging in the background. The next step was crucial. He couldn't afford to hesitate. The swarm was relentless, and despite their earlier setbacks, they were not easy to defeat. "Tactical analysis?" Tobias asked, his voice firm. Darian's voice responded without hesitation. "We've broken their command structure. They're scattered, but they're not retreating. They're adapting to the phase shifts. We need to go deeper." Tobias nodded slowly. "Then let's make them regret that decision." The Grendel surged forward, its quantum displacement field activated once again. Tobias could see the alien ships, once so sure of their dominance, falter in the wake of their own confusion. The sheer chaos of the situation worked in their favor. Tobias knew they wouldn't have this advantage forever, but for now, it was enough. The first alien ship disintegrated in a burst of light as the disruptor pulse collided with its shields, collapsing them in on themselves. Tobias could feel the shift in the atmosphere on the bridge, the crew's breath catching in anticipation as the first successful strike landed. He didn't allow himself the luxury of celebration. There were still more ships to take down. The mystery of the Grendel's true power was unfolding, and Tobias could feel it in his bones. This battle was far from over, but it was only a matter of time before the swarm realized that they were facing a new kind of enemy. One that didn't follow the rules, one that wasn't afraid to rewrite them. "Push forward," Tobias said, his voice cold, precise. "We're just getting started." The alien fleet scattered like leaves in a storm, every ship erratically adjusting course, firing into empty space where the Grendel had been moments ago. Tobias watched as the once perfect formations crumbled, their unity dissolved in the chaos his ship had wrought. The tactical readouts flickered on the laser plasma display, showing fragmented signals as the swarm ships fought to regain their composure. The power shift was unmistakable. The swarm was no longer confident in their overwhelming strength. They were hunting for something they couldn't quite understand. "Keep them off balance," Tobias muttered under his breath. "We need to break their confidence." The bridge fell into a tense silence, broken only by the quiet, steady clicks of his crew at their stations. His eyes darted across the heads-up displays, calculating the next move. The enemy wasn't retreating. Not yet. They were still adapting. But that was the problem. They had already learned too much. The Grendel had slipped through their grasp, but Tobias knew their advantage was fading fast. "Tactical," Tobias said, breaking the silence. "We need to move in closer, push their formation even further apart." Darian Vek's eyes flicked to the display as the tactical officer processed the order. "They're adapting to our shifts faster than before. We can't just keep jumping around, Captain. We need a direct strike." Tobias considered this for a moment, his jaw tightening. The Grendel had been dancing in and out of space, an elusive phantom to the alien fleet, but Darian was right. They couldn't keep evading, not if they were going to crush the swarm's will to fight. "Their command structure is weakening, but we need to hit them at their core before they regroup," Tobias said, his voice steady but determined. He looked at the displays, watching as the swarm's ships began to shift, their movements now more erratic than ever. "Target their flagship. We need to make them question everything." Marek Solis, sitting behind him, adjusted the settings on his console. "If we can break their command, the rest will crumble. I'll prep the disruptor pulse." "Do it," Tobias said, his gaze never leaving the plasma display. The Grendel surged forward, almost imperceptible in its movements. The ship didn't need to lunge. It slipped, seamlessly, through the fabric of space, making its way toward the largest vessel of the swarm. Tobias could see it now, looming ahead, its dark hull barely visible against the vast backdrop of stars. It was the center of the enemy fleet, the heart of the swarm's strategy. If they could destroy this, the rest would follow like a chain reaction. He could feel the ship's pulse beneath his feet, a subtle, almost imperceptible shift as the Grendel entered another phase of its attack. Tobias couldn't afford to wait. The alien ships were still regrouping, but they were quick. They would catch on soon. It was time to make the move that would decide everything. "Phase shift on my mark," Tobias ordered, his voice low and controlled. "We hit them hard. All systems engaged." Marek's hands danced across the control panel, inputting the sequence with practiced precision. The ship's form shimmered, flickering as it slipped into the next phase, warping just enough to make it nearly impossible to track. The alien ships were closing in, but it didn't matter. The Grendel was already past them, a mere whisper in the fabric of reality. On the heads-up display, the trajectory was calculated, the line from the Grendel's current position to the heart of the swarm's flagship drawing a steady, unbreakable path. Tobias could feel the ship's slight tremor as the quantum displacement engines began to hum with power. They were ready. "Deploy the disruptor pulse now," Tobias ordered, his voice cutting through the tense atmosphere of the bridge. Marek hit the final command, and Tobias felt a shudder of release as the pulse shot out, invisible but deadly toward the flagship. For a moment, everything seemed to stand still. Then the flagship flickered. Its shields, a shimmering, impenetrable wall just moments ago, began to fade, collapsing in on themselves like a punctured balloon. In seconds, the massive vessel was crippled, its power failing, its systems crashing. "Direct hit," Darian said with a grim smile. "They're reeling." Tobias didn't wait for the swarm to regroup. He knew their weakness now. Without their flagship, they were vulnerable. He barked orders, each one calculated, designed to exploit the chaos and confusion he had created. "Now move in close. Keep them off balance." The Grendel phased again, this time moving with deadly purpose. Tobias could almost feel the enemy's panic, waves of indecision and fear crashing through their ranks. They were disorganized now. The Grendel's advantage wasn't just its technology, it was Tobias's ability to control the flow of battle, to keep the enemy guessing, to manipulate the uncertainty they felt. "Captain, they're scrambling to launch reinforcements," Marek warned. "They're attempting a counterattack." Tobias felt a chill of realization, though it didn't show in his voice. The swarm wasn't giving up. They were evolving. This was what he had expected. The fight wasn't over, but they had hit the first critical blow. "Deploy the secondary disruptor," Tobias said calmly, even though his mind was racing. He wasn't done. Not yet. "This is where we finish it." The ship's systems hummed to life again, and the Grendel phased once more. But this time, they didn't retreat into the shadows. Tobias sent them into the heart of the swarm, straight toward the flurry of ships trying to regain control. The Grendel was a force now, a weapon of unpredictability, one they couldn't fight with sheer force. The disruptor pulse hit again, and Tobias watched the enemy's ships stagger under its impact. They couldn't keep up with the shifting nature of the Grendel's attacks. Their firepower, their advanced weaponry, all of it was useless against something that couldn't be predicted or countered. "Now," Tobias said, his eyes narrowing with intent, "hit them where it hurts." With a precise command, he sent the Grendel into the final strike. The enemy was already confused, their command structure in disarray. The pulse hit the heart of their secondary fleet, sending another ripple of destruction through their ranks. The swarm began to splinter, each ship unable to coordinate with the others, each one flailing in the aftermath of Tobias's strategy. The bridge was silent, but Tobias could feel the weight of the moment settle around him. The Grendel had done it. Earth had done it. They had faced an overwhelming force and, against all odds, turned the tide. The enemy was falling back, their remaining ships disoriented and panicked, trying to regroup in the face of Earth's unexpected victory. Tobias didn't take his eyes off the display. This was just the beginning. The swarm had underestimated them, and now they were about to pay for it. "Prepare for the final phase," Tobias said, his voice colder than before. "We finish this." The remnants of the Void Swarm fleet were staggering. Ships flickered in and out of reality, their energy readings flickering wildly across the laser plasma displays. They were broken, fractured, their core leadership shattered. Tobias Core watched the chaos unfold on the heads-up display, his gaze unwavering. The swarm had no central force anymore. They were scattered, confused, their once unified front now in tatters. It had taken every ounce of his strategic mind to get to this point. Every piece of this battle had been a calculated risk, a gamble he had known would either make Earth's place among the stars secure or doom them to the forgotten annals of history. But as the remaining swarm ships fled, Tobias felt a strange kind of calm settle over him. It wasn't relief. Not yet. Not when the galaxy was still watching, and the war had not yet fully played out. But it was a sense of understanding, a quiet acknowledgement of Earth's strength, raw, untamed, and impossible to predict. "Captain, we've neutralized the core fleet." Darian's voice broke through the quiet hum of the bridge. "The remaining ships are in retreat. They're trying to regroup." Tobias let out a slow breath. His mind was already several steps ahead. The swarm might have been retreating now, but they had learned. They'd seen the vulnerability of their fleets, and were not likely to forget the lessons of today. "Keep tracking them," Tobias ordered. "But don't let up. We hit them again while they're scattered." A brief pause followed before Marek spoke up. "The Council is sending a transmission, Captain. They want to speak with you." Tobias looked up, his mind still focused on the remnants of the Void Swarm. He couldn't afford to let up, not now, not when victory was in his grasp. But this was the moment, the one that would define their place in the galaxy. "Put it through," he said, his voice cutting through the tension in the room. The laser plasma display flickered for a moment, and then the face of Rak appeared on the screen. His once confident expression had faded, replaced with something Tobias had never expected to see: respect. "Commander Core," Rak said, his voice no longer dripping with sarcasm but something far deeper, something Tobias couldn't quite place. "I owe you an apology." Tobias leaned forward slightly, eyes narrowing, the weight of the moment hanging in the air. "Apology accepted. But you're late." Rak's eyes flickered, the slightest hint of a smile tugging at the corner of his mouth. "I didn't understand. I couldn't see what Earth's technology was capable of. We all thought you were a primitive species, barely out of the Stone Age." "I don't blame you," Tobias replied. "Most of the galaxy can't see what's right in front of them. It's easy to look at something simple and call it inferior, but sometimes simplicity hides the most dangerous power." There was a moment of silence, the kind that carried the weight of 1,000 years of misjudgments. Rak glanced at something off-screen, as if composing himself before speaking again. "I was wrong. Earth's technology, your people, your approach, has shattered our understanding. You've proven that strength doesn't always come from grandeur. Sometimes it comes from knowing how to bend the rules." Tobias exhaled slowly, his fingers tapping lightly on the console. "We've been fighting this battle long before we stepped into the galaxy's spotlight. The Grendel wasn't a mistake. It was our answer." The screen flickered again, and Virlan's face appeared beside Rak's. The intellectual leader's once smug demeanor was replaced with something almost humble. "I had thought we had all the answers, but you've shown us that we don't." There was no immediate response from Tobias, no quick words to fill the silence. Instead, he simply nodded, his gaze steady, unwavering. It was never about being bigger or faster. It was about thinking differently. The Void Swarm didn't win because of their weapons. They lost because they couldn't adapt to what they didn't understand. A low murmur of agreement rippled through the bridge crew. The weight of their victory was starting to settle in, but Tobias knew the work wasn't done. He wasn't foolish enough to believe that this would be the last fight. The galaxy was vast, filled with unknowns. But this battle, this war, this was humanity's moment. Rak turned back toward Tobias, his expression now one of open acknowledgement. "The Council agrees, Commander. Earth's contribution is no longer a matter of doubt. You've earned your place here." Tobias stood tall, his fingers curling around the edge of the console, his mind still racing. He wasn't sure whether the apology was sincere, but it didn't matter now. What mattered was the message that had been sent. Earth wasn't weak, it wasn't primitive, and the galaxy would never forget what they had learned today. "Thank you," Tobias said simply, his voice soft but resolute. "We've proven what Earth can do, and we'll do it again." There was a slight pause before Virlan spoke again. "We want your scientists. We want to learn from you, Commander, to understand what you've done." Tobias didn't hesitate. "My people will teach you, but there's one thing you'll need to understand before anything else." "What is that?" Gorak asked, genuinely curious. "You won't always see it coming, and when you think you've figured it out, we'll do it again. That's the power of thinking differently." Tobias's words hung in the air, as heavy as the stars themselves. He turned away from the display, facing the crew behind him. The bridge had gone quiet, the tension still lingering, but it wasn't the same tension as before. This was the kind of silence that came after victory, the kind of silence that was earned, not given. "Prepare to return to Earth," Tobias said, his voice steady but full of the weight of their victory. "It's time to show the galaxy who we are." The crew moved quickly, the atmosphere on the bridge now one of purpose and pride. The Grendel had done its job, and Earth had proven its worth in ways that would echo across the galaxy for generations to come. Tobias Corps didn't need anyone's approval. He didn't need the galaxy to understand. But they would. Earth had come from the ashes of doubt, and now they stood tall, unshaken, ready to write the next chapter of their story. "We're just getting started," Tobias muttered, as the stars ahead seemed to grow brighter, reflecting the future that awaited them. And for the first time he could feel it, the certainty that humanity's place in the galaxy was no longer a question. The Grendel moved forward, its journey far from over. The galaxy would soon learn what it meant to underestimate Earth. And when that lesson was learned, the consequences would be irreversible.